the old and the new very mixed up in this story, but I want to make one connection. I'm thinking of it now between the old and the new because of the grist mill. The grist mill that my father created, which was important to me because I worked there for 20 years when I wasn't in school. And it was a great blow to him and to me when the mill was destroyed here because there was no business for it anymore. Nobody has livestock much except horses. So there's no production in this community and there's no need for a grist mill. People have their own little hammer mills for grinding oats for their show horses or whatever. But my Uncle Donald also had a grist mill in Erin. But going back to the Mackays, the famous story of which is just being uncovered now about the grist mill, which was started by McClure in 1855, 56, 57, I guess when he built his cabin and also built his grist mill, and these foundations are still there by the creek and not far from the house, the log house that he built. Must have a picture of the log house, don't we, Sandy?
The original log house?
No.
Okay, yes, we do.
It looks like today. Those,
Yes, we do.
you can see the kind of well where the water wheel was suspended and the water would run through that well going down the creek and would turn the grist mill. So there must be some kind of genetic interest or something in grist mills that is in my blood. But when my father wanted me to take over our grist mill, I was more interested in the ministry. This is the log cabin that McClure built in 1855, but of course it was later covered with vinyl in order to make it fixed up inside, and so you can't see the logs, but we have done work on it. Tom Murison has done a report and has shown that the logs were from the year 1855, and he's figured out a lot of the history from that time, from looking around the surroundings. He discovered this well for the water wheel, and he discovered a raceway where the water would have run, and we're now also positing that there was an Indian village there later. That's another whole story which Sandy will tell you better than I myself. Where are we now? Where should we go? What's happening to the time?
I think we were going to talk about number 12.
Yes. This is in the interest of the School of Scottish Studies. Well, there's a lot of history written, and I've already mentioned that this was specifically a Scottish community, and others came in later. I remember in the 30s, my father gave credit one night to a recent Polish immigrant who had neither food nor money in his house and had heard that my father in the general store would give him some food on credit. And he came and he did get some food, and he always shopped there afterwards. But basically it was Scottish. And my father was very fond of his Scottish music, even the bagpipes. But he would listen to Scots music. He was very definitely a Scots. It was very important to him, and it was a great shame that he never got to visit Scotland, but I kind of went on his behalf in 1988. My impression up to that time of Scotland was very much colored by my 8, 10, 12 years living in Zambia, northern Rhodesia, because of the British colonial history there, and I had seen the detrimental effects of the British Empire on Africa, and had, I think, negative feelings, attitudes towards the British for what they had done and were still doing. It was still a colony when we went there in 1962. It became independent in 64, but I saw the racial superiority, I saw the discrimination, and the neglect in some ways of native people there. So my feelings were negative, and when I came back in '76 to live here, it was difficult for me to get enthusiastic about my Scottish heritage. But because of my father, I guess I decided to do that, and when I began to read a bit about it and to try and help him write down his memories and his story, picking up books like The Rockside Pioneers and so on, and earlier books about the great eviction of the Scots from the small farms in the northern part of Scotland particularly, but really all over. The Mackays from the north, from Rogart, from, what was she, something of Sutherland, the Duchess of Sutherland?
That's right, yes.
And even the Kirkwoods down in Loch Winnock. I visited the parish there where they came from, and I could see that even the Scots hated the British for their colonial tendencies and their domination. So when I came to see the Scottish point of view in the British Isles, that they had been evicted and so on, then I realized that the strong take what they want, they evict the weak, whether it's land or resources or whatever. You still see it in the world all over Africa and everywhere. I came then to feel some identity with these crofters moved off their farms. I saw one of my dad's cousins, second cousin, who was a Mackay, heard her story, and I was quite moved then and built some identity between Africans evicted from their land, pushed into the infertile hinterland, just the way that Africans were pushed into the poorer land in Africa, and the way that native people were pushed into poorer land here in Canada. Those connections came to motivate me and to pick up my interest in that side of the Scottish history. Now, of course, when you come to Fallbrook, you realize that there was an Indian village there, probably a First Nations people's village from 1450 maybe, somewhere, and that those people had to leave or had left because of the crofters themselves evicted, now coming to be somehow part, at least, of the eviction of native people from this part of the country. That seems to be the common theme philosophically and historically that has captured me, and even now I'm still working on that theme in relation to Africa, which I know. Okay.
Okay. Are you or were you married?
I was, and I still am, for it'll be 52 years this year that I've been married to Marion Lorena Woods, and she's still alive and very much a partner of mine. Her family have a different story, which doesn't need to be told here. They were English who went to Ireland with Cromwell and became part of the dominant group there, and later came to Canada to live. We have 4 children, all alive, 2 teachers, a physiotherapist, and a janitor. They are all married, and 3 live in Toronto, 1 in Vancouver. I'm hoping they'll become interested in their history, but my youngest son, Kenneth, has shown some interest in our history, and they've been on the tour of the homestead and so on to see where the history started here in this country. Okay, my hour's up, so we better pick and choose what's left on that page that you want me to talk about.
Well, I think we've
Maybe I
answered
should
some
look
of the
up-
questions. We
should
talked about the community, but what about how has the community changed over the years?
Yes, those are
Yeah.
good questions, because it's changed completely.
I have some notes on that. The community today, I think, began to change even early on when I mentioned that my father went to work in Beaumont's knitting mills in Glen Williams, and his older brother Oliver, the firstborn, he went and built a career in Toronto as a machinist, tool and die operator. So this is, we're talking 20s and 30s. So there was already exodus when the land wasn't big enough or rich enough to support all the children in a family. Later on, when in the war, there was an aircraft factory at Malton, down where Toronto Airport is now, and young people from here, I remember Dick Shortle, about 1940, went to Malton and got a job sweeping floors or something in the airplane factory at some fantastic wage that was amazing. And that was kind of maybe the beginning of the commuter age, where you would live here, commute to Toronto and work, which of course what everybody does now. Nearly everyone is a commuter. And then there were people starting to go off to university. I had to go to Georgetown even to get my high school in 1945. So in 1950 I had to go to Toronto for university at U of T for 7 years doing arts and then theology. 55, my parents left, moved to Georgetown because he had no other children coming. I only had one other sister to take over the mill, and he was very disappointed. But so he sold both the mill, and then my mother persuaded him to sell the house, and they moved to Georgetown. After that time, farms began to be subdivided and houses began to be built here. I don't know the history well because I left for Saskatchewan in 1957 and I left for Africa in 1961. But it's all about commuters now and retirees and gentlemen farmers and horse farms, and that's the kind of community it is now. And it's quite interesting to me to see how the new people, so-called, and maybe here 20 or 30 years, mix with the older farmers like my cousin Wilma and a few others that you would see on a Sunday here in church, Emerson Clark. They try hard, and most of the congregation here now, I think, is probably newer comers, or maybe 50-50. There is a community hall, and they have some events there. The social events seem to be mostly around slow pitch and around curling and euchre games. So when you read the Bell and Fad newsletter, it's mostly about who won the euchre games in the community hall. So it's very much now about newcomers, new community, and the commuters. Of course, the store is still going, but I think it has struggled. The post office has been kept open. But the difference, of course, when there was a horse and buggy stage, this was close and you would get everything here. Now with, for decades now with the automotive culture, you can go to Toronto for a loaf of bread or, et cetera, et cetera. But so the community spirit was easier in those days, I think, because you could, people would come to things. They would come for church. They would come for a ball team. If every farmer's son didn't come to play ball, we didn't have a team. It wasn't enough. The same with hockey. As I've indicated, there were very few. One of the big sports was horseshoes across the street, across the 7th line there from the grocery store. And now, of course, it's most of the social life takes place in Erin and Acton or Georgetown or around work. But there are some people who really work hard to make the community work. They do have a newsletter. Diane, what's her name?
Croft.
Hmm?
Diane Croft?
Yeah, is one of the movers. But the most lively institution in this community now is this Congregation of the United Church, and continues to be the center of the community, I think. So in those days it was almost subsistence farming. Everybody could live off their farm. If it was a poor farm, they could have chickens and pork and beef, and they could freeze them for the winter. You could kill a beef, and we used to get freezers in Georgetown, and you could go there and take out for shopping on the weekend, take out a piece of meat out of your freezer. And before that, even there were beef rings then. That somebody would kill a beef this week, and you would get your steak, and then next week it was somebody else's turn. It went around the ring, and every week you'd get a roast, and after 6 months it would be back to you again, or whatever.
A beef ring.
Yeah, it was called a beef ring.
Never heard of that. Good.
And it was also Farm Forum. I remember very clearly, even though I was young, going to somebody's farmhouse, F.W. Shortle on the 8th line. And there would be a radio program, say on Monday night at 8 o'clock or something, the Radio Farm Forum would be on. And they would be giving a topic for discussion for maybe half an hour, and then people present would have some questions to discuss, and we would be discussing farming and community issues as they affected our community. So it was a community of self-reliance, and people generally self-reliance, not big into a money economy, but able to produce enough of their own stuff. Now, of course, we're completely reliant. We produce no food in this community that I know of, to speak of.
No.
And there's no factories, there's no industry. It's a dormitory community, I guess is the sociological word that's being used for that. So still there are the efforts being made to build community here. And Fallbrook is one of the projects that we would like to help galvanize the community together, but so far it's been slow. But we're soldiering on. It says about a funny story. Let me tell you a funny story.
Good, yes.
I told you about the horseshoes across the road from the store, and the men used to pitch horseshoes, and whoever lost the game would have to buy a Coke for the other guy from our store. I took on one of the local guys who was always hanging around the store with nothing to do. He worked for Dan Campbell. His name was Jerry Kentner. He was a British immigrant who still wished he was in Britain. But anyway, I took him on to play horseshoes, and of course he beat me, and I had no money to buy the Coke, so I had to. I don't know whether I just actually filched it or whether I begged from my father. I don't remember. I remember being very embarrassed anyway to go and get the Coke because it was, of course, on your honor since you made the gamble that you would provide it.
Well, that's very good. Those are very good questions. How has this community changed or enriched your life? Have we gone through that? Do you feel that you've said so much? Everything else pretty well covered, I think, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so.
You've because he